Caleb called me at 6:17 on a Tuesday and skipped hello entirely. "Can you pick Owen up from school?" he asked. "I'm trapped at work. His history project is due tomorrow. And apparently we have no food in the house except mustard and something in a container I'm afraid to open." I laughed because that was the version of Caleb I knew best. Competent until 3 things happened at once, then suddenly convinced civilization was ending. "Send me the address," I said, even though I already knew where Owen's school was. An hour later, I was standing in Caleb's kitchen while his 16-year-old brother argued that frozen pizza counted as a balanced meal because tomatoes were technically vegetables. By the time Caleb finally came through the front door, tie loosened and dark hair slightly wrecked from running his hands through it, Owen and I had spread poster board across half the dining table. "You're alive," I said. "Barely." Caleb dropped his keys in the bowl beside the door, looked at Owen's project, then at the pan on the stove. His shoulders lowered almost visibly. "You made dinner? Don't sound so shocked." "I'm not shocked. I'm considering proposing." That joke should have landed exactly the way hundreds of jokes between us had landed over the last 11 years. Instead, something in my chest caught. Caleb didn't notice. He moved straight to Owen, crouched beside his chair, and started asking questions about the project. I had seen Caleb angry, drunk, exhausted, celebrating promotions, recovering from bad dates, and once crying so hard after his mother's funeral that he couldn't speak. Somehow I had never really watched him like this. He listened while Owen rambled. He corrected him without humiliating him. When Owen snapped that he already knew what he was doing, Caleb didn't snap back. He just said, "Okay, show me." 10 minutes later, he was washing dishes while quietly quizzing Owen on dates for the presentation. Then he reached behind himself without looking and handed me a mug. 2 sugars, splash of milk. Exactly how I took it. "You look tired," I said. "I am tired." That wasn't permission to fall asleep standing up. He smiled at me over his shoulder, softer than usual. "Good thing you're here, then." I stared at him a second too long. It was ridiculous. Caleb was Caleb, my best friend. The guy whose terrible college haircut I had photographic evidence of. The man I had never once considered in any category that required me to notice the line of his shoulders under a wrinkled white shirt. Owen called for help from the table, and Caleb immediately turned toward him. I watched him go and had the uncomfortable feeling that something obvious had been sitting in front of me for years, waiting for me to look at it differently. The feeling should have worn off by morning. Instead, it followed me through the rest of the week. Caleb texted me Thursday afternoon asking if I was anywhere near the grocery store. I was technically, if a 12-minute detour counted. 20 minutes later, I was pushing a cart beside him while Owen sent increasingly specific requests to our phones from home. "He added 3 kinds of cereal," I said. "Denied. You're a tyrant." "I'm raising a teenager." Same job description. Caleb reached past me for coffee and dropped my usual brand into the cart without asking. I noticed because lately I noticed everything. Saturday, I drove Owen to pick up materials he still needed for school while Caleb handled laundry and caught up on work. Sunday evening, I arrived to find 3 plates already on the table. "You knew I was coming?" I asked. Caleb glanced at me as if the question itself was strange. "You always come over Sunday." He was right. I just had never thought of it as a routine before. Apparently Owen had. Halfway through dinner, he pushed his phone toward Caleb. They sent another reminder. Caleb read the screen and sighed. "About the family event?" I asked. Owen immediately became interested in his food. "It's not a big deal." Caleb gave me a look that said it was absolutely a big deal. Owen's school was holding an event in a couple of weeks where students would present projects and spend the afternoon doing activities with parents or whoever counted as family. Owen hated anything that required explaining why Caleb, his 30-year-old brother, was the person signing forms and attending meetings instead of a parent. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to," Caleb told him. "I know, but if you want to go, we'll make it work." Owen shrugged. "You'll be working that morning. I can change things around. And Evan can come." The words were so casual that I almost missed them. Caleb looked at me, Owen kept eating. Can I? I asked. Why are you asking me? Caleb said. Because he's your brother. And you've been showing up for him since he was 11. Something warm and inconvenient moved through me. Owen finally looked up. So you'll come? Yeah, I said. Of course. His shoulders loosened, just slightly. Caleb saw it too. Under the table, his knee bumped mine. Neither of us moved away immediately. Later, when I stood to leave, Caleb handed me a container of leftovers before I could refuse. Wednesday? He asked. What's Wednesday? Owen has that appointment after school. I thought you were coming for dinner afterward. I stared at him. Did we make that plan? Caleb frowned, genuinely trying to remember. I guess not. You're scheduling me now? Apparently. He smiled, but there was a trace of uncertainty behind it, as if he had only just realized he had assumed I would be there. I should have teased him. Instead, I looked past him at the third plate still sitting on the table and wondered when Caleb's house had stopped feeling like somewhere I visited, and when he had started expecting me to come back. By the time Owen's school event rolled around, I had stopped pretending Wednesday dinners and weekend errands were isolated favors. I still hadn't figured out what they were instead. Caleb and I arrived at the school Saturday afternoon carrying more supplies than Owen had insisted he needed. He was already inside helping set up his project display, which meant Caleb and I fell into our usual division of labor without discussing it. He checked the presentation materials while I dealt with the folding display board that refused to stand straight. Left side, Caleb said. I know. It's leaning. So are you. I'm holding 3 folders. Excuses. He laughed and nudged my shoulder with his as he passed. The contact lasted maybe a second. I felt it for considerably longer. Once the room filled, Owen became quieter. I understood why almost immediately. Parents arrived in pairs or small family groups, asking the usual harmless questions about projects and grades. Caleb stayed close without hovering. When Owen needed something, Caleb handled it. When Caleb was occupied, I did. There was nothing planned about it. That was apparently what made it noticeable. A woman helping organize the event stopped beside us while Caleb was fixing something on Owen's table. She smiled at me. You two have this down. Owen's lucky to have both of you. I opened my mouth automatically, waiting for Caleb to explain that I was just his friend. Caleb looked at Owen first. Owen had heard her. Instead of shrinking the way he usually did when someone asked about his family, he simply nodded and went back to arranging his notes. Caleb smiled at the woman. He's a good kid. That was it. No correction. No awkward explanation. Later, while Owen was talking to one of his teachers, I caught Caleb near the hallway. You know she thought I was family, right? Caleb looked genuinely puzzled by my tone. You are family. My stomach dropped in a way that made no sense. That's not exactly what she meant. Understanding crossed his face. For half a second, neither of us said anything. Then he glanced through the doorway toward Owen. He was comfortable. I wasn't going to make a whole thing out of correcting somebody. Right? Does that bother you? No, the answer came too quickly. Caleb studied me, but Owen called his name before he could say anything else. On the drive home, I sat in the passenger seat while Owen talked from the back about how the event had been less terrible than expected. Caleb caught my eye once at a red light and smiled. I looked away first. That evening, after Owen disappeared upstairs, I found myself noticing things I had never counted before. The way Caleb automatically left room beside him on the couch, the fact that he asked whether I wanted coffee without asking whether I planned to stay, the ease with which my presence seemed built into the end of his day. None of it was new. That was the problem. I was beginning to wonder how much of this had always been here, and why I had only just started seeing it. After that Saturday, I started testing the edges of my place in Caleb's life without admitting that was what I was doing. I stopped walking into his house without knocking. The first time, Caleb opened the door and stared at me. Did you lose your key? I blinked. Months earlier, he had given me the spare because I was the person most likely to need it if Owen got locked out. I had barely thought about it since. No. Then why are you standing outside? Normal people knock. You stopped qualifying as normal here years ago. He turned and walked toward the kitchen, leaving the door open for me. Inside, I noticed my coffee in the cabinet. Not just the brand Caleb had thrown into the grocery cart that week. There was an entire unopened bag behind it. My preferred cereal sat beside Owen's aggressively sugary collection. A phone charger I had once forgotten was still plugged in beside the couch, except I had forgotten the original 1 month ago and this was newer. Did you replace my charger? I asked. Caleb glanced over from the stove. The old one stopped working. Why didn't you throw it away? Because then you'd complain every time your phone died here. He said it like that explained everything. Maybe it did. That was what frightened me. I had spent years interpreting every accommodation as evidence that Caleb knew me well. Now each one seemed to ask a different question. Later, while Owen finished homework upstairs, Caleb asked whether I could look over the schedule for the next few weeks. He had rearranged work around Owen's commitments and wanted another opinion. I stayed standing instead of taking my usual chair beside him. You can handle it, I said. Caleb looked up. I know I can. Then you don't need me checking everything. His expression changed. I didn't say I needed you to. You ask me about everything anyway, because I care what you think. There was nothing dramatic in his voice. That made it worse. I reached for my jacket. I should probably head home. Caleb glanced at the clock. It's 9. Exactly. Since. When has 9 mattered? I shrugged. Since I remembered I have my own apartment. He leaned back, watching me with a crease between his eyebrows. Okay, what's going on? Nothing. Evan. I hated how easily he could make my name sound like a challenge. I'm just trying not to be here constantly. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Why are you suddenly acting like a guest? I looked at him and had no safe answer. Because the spare key felt different now. Because my coffee and charger felt different. Because hearing him say I was family had rearranged something I couldn't put back. Because I had started noticing his hands when he cooked and his tired smile when I walked through the door. Maybe I got too comfortable, I said finally. Caleb's face tightened almost imperceptibly. I never said you were. Before I could answer, Owen called from upstairs asking Caleb to look at something. Caleb stood, but his eyes stayed on me for another second. Don't leave yet. It sounded less like an instruction than a request. I sat down again, and while he went upstairs, I stared at the spare key in my palm and wondered whether I was afraid of misunderstanding my place in Caleb's life, or finally understanding it. Caleb came back downstairs 20 minutes later to find me exactly where he had left me, except the spare key was back in my pocket and I had talked myself into leaving at least 6 times. Owen's asleep, he said. Good. You're still here. You told me not to leave. His mouth moved like he almost smiled, but didn't. He went into the kitchen, and I followed because apparently even my existential crisis respected routine. Caleb filled the kettle, then leaned against the counter while we waited. The house felt different when Owen was asleep. Quieter, smaller. There was no homework to discuss, no schedule to organize, no practical reason for me to be standing 3 feet from my best friend at nearly 10 at night. Are you going to tell me what happened? Caleb asked. Nothing happened. You started knocking on my door. You're really stuck on that. You have a key, Evan. For emergencies. That isn't why I gave it to you. I looked at him. He seemed to realize he had said more than intended, because his eyes dropped briefly to the counter. Then why? I asked. Caleb exhaled. Because you're here all the time. Exactly. I don't understand why that suddenly bothers you. It doesn't bother me. Then what does? I could have lied again. Instead, I looked around the kitchen. The coffee he bought for me, the chair I always used, the stupid charger beside the couch, and felt exhausted by pretending those things meant nothing to me. I don't know what I'm doing here anymore. Caleb went still. You're helping me. There it was, the safest possible answer. I laughed once without humor. Right? Helping. That came out wrong. Did it? Yes. He pushed away from the counter. I don't think of you as some guy I call when I need groceries or someone to drive Owen somewhere. Then what am I? The question hung between us. Caleb looked at me for so long that I became aware of every inch separating us. I don't know how to answer that without changing something, he said quietly. My heartbeat stumbled. Maybe something already changed. Caleb stepped closer. Not enough to touch me. Enough that I could have moved away if I wanted. I didn't. His eyes searched mine with an uncertainty I had almost never seen in him. What are we talking about? He asked. I think you know. I want to hear you say it. That's convenient. I'm terrified, actually. That surprised a laugh out of me, and Caleb smiled. The tension should have broken. Instead, his hand came up slowly and stopped near my face, giving me every opportunity to pull back. His fingers touched my jaw. Deliberately. There was no joke attached to it, no one watching, nothing practical he could blame it on. I leaned into his hand before I could stop myself. Caleb inhaled sharply. For one suspended second, I thought he was going to kiss me. I wanted him to. That realization hit with enough force to make me step back. His hand dropped immediately. Neither of us spoke. The kettle clicked off behind him. Finally Caleb said, "That didn't feel like friendship." No, my voice barely worked. It didn't. He looked frightened and relieved at the same time. Understood because I felt exactly the same. Nothing else happened that night. It didn't need to. When I finally walked home, Caleb's fingers still seemed to be resting against my jaw, and the question that had been following me for weeks had changed. I no longer wondered whether I was seeing him differently. I wondered what would happen now that he knew I was. The next morning, Caleb texted me at 7:12. Coffee? I stared at the message until the screen dimmed, then typed, already at work. It was true, which made the avoidance easier to justify. For the next few days, we performed a version of normal that fooled absolutely no one involved. I still answered when Caleb called. He still sent me reminders about Owen's upcoming school event. But I stopped dropping by without a reason, and when I did go over, I knocked. Caleb never mentioned it. That was worse. Wednesday evening, I arrived for dinner and found my usual plate waiting. Caleb looked at me when I walked in, then deliberately looked away. Owen was complaining about something at school, so we slipped into familiar roles. Caleb cooked, I listened, Owen complained. Everything worked. Nothing felt the same. At one point Caleb reached past me for a dish and stopped before our arms touched. The tiny correction hurt more than it should have. After dinner, Owen went upstairs. Caleb started clearing the table. You can leave those, I said. I've got it. I know. The words echoed what he had told me days earlier. He leaned against the counter. Evan, I need to know what we're doing. So do I. I can't just pretend the other night didn't happen. I'm not asking you to. You're barely here. Maybe I was here too much before. Caleb's jaw tightened. There it is again. What? You acting like you accidentally wandered into our lives and stayed too long. I looked toward the stairs. This isn't only about us. His expression changed immediately. I know. Owen depends on you. Yes. And I'm part of his routine now. Caleb was silent. If we try something and it goes badly, I continued, I don't just lose my best friend. He loses someone too. Caleb rubbed a hand over his face. You think I haven't thought about that? I think you've thought about nothing else since you touched me. He didn't deny it. That was answer enough. I started coming over less after that. Not disappearing. Not breaking promises. Just removing the unnecessary hours, the coffee after dinner, the casual Sunday afternoons, the moments when there was no task giving me an excuse to stay. The effect was immediate. Caleb stopped assuming I would be there. Owen started asking whether I was coming instead. One evening, Caleb handed me a replacement phone charger I had left on the kitchen counter. Take this. I frowned. Why? Because apparently you're not here enough to need it anymore. The bitterness in his voice surprised both of us. Caleb, I bought that one because the old one broke. I stared at him. You bought it? Yes. You never said that. Why would I? You needed one here. He stopped, realizing what he had admitted. I remembered the coffee, the spare key, the extra food, the way he had built my preferences into the house so quietly I had mistaken them for accidents. Caleb looked away first. Forget it. But I couldn't. How long have you been doing things like that? He gave a short, frustrated laugh. This is exactly why I didn't want to start pulling everything apart. That isn't an answer. No, it isn't. He picked up the charger and put it back on the counter between us. Owen's event is Saturday. You're still coming, right? I promised him. Caleb nodded. After that, I knew what he was asking. I also knew I didn't have an answer that wouldn't hurt one of us. Maybe I should give us some space. Caleb's face went carefully blank. Right? I left the charger on the counter when I walked out. For the first time since Caleb had given me a key, I stood outside his closed door and wondered whether trying to protect what we had was already destroying it. Saturday afternoon, I arrived at Owen's school exactly when I had promised. Caleb was already there with him. For one awkward second, Caleb and I looked at each other across the room like people who had forgotten how to cross a distance we used to ignore. Then Owen spotted me. You came. I said I would. His smile was quick but unmistakable, and something inside me twisted. The event itself was easier for him this time. He showed us his work without constantly checking who might be watching. When he needed help moving part of his display, Caleb took one side and I took the other. When Caleb got pulled into a conversation, I stayed with Owen. We moved around each other with the same effortless coordination we always had. That was the problem. From the outside, nothing looked broken. By the time we returned to Caleb's house that evening, Owen was tired but visibly pleased with how the day had gone. He disappeared upstairs after thanking us both, leaving Caleb and me alone in the kitchen. The replacement charger was still on the counter. I stared at it for a moment. I meant what I said. I told him. Caleb didn't pretend not to understand. About space. Yeah. He folded his arms. You came today. Because I promised Owen. I know. And that's exactly why this is complicated. I'm already part of things here that don't disappear just because you and I make a mistake. Caleb's expression hardened. You keep talking like being part of this happened to you. I'm saying maybe I let it go too far without thinking. You think I wasn't thinking? I looked at him. I don't know what you were thinking, Caleb. That's the problem. He turned away, then stopped with both hands braced against the counter. For several seconds, the only sound was the refrigerator humming behind us. The charger wasn't an accident, he said finally. I figured that out. Neither was the coffee. My pulse began to climb. Caleb faced me again. Or the spare key. You said that was for Owen. That was the excuse that made it easy to give you one. I didn't speak. Sunday dinners didn't just happen either, he continued. Half the time I asked Owen what he wanted to eat based on what I knew you liked. I asked your opinion about things I could have decided myself. I invited you over when I didn't need help. Sometimes I made up reasons because asking you to come over just because I wanted you here felt like saying too much. Every small thing I had been collecting in my head rearranged itself at once. How long? I asked. Caleb swallowed. Longer than these last few weeks. You knew that I wanted you around more than I should want my best friend around? Yeah. He gave a humorless laugh. Knowing what to call it took longer. I thought of every invitation I had treated as convenience, every extra plate, every time he had found some reason for me to stay. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were my safest person. His voice dropped, and Owen finally had something stable. I wasn't going to gamble both because I wanted something I had no reason to believe you wanted too. But you kept pulling me closer. I know. That isn't fair. I know that too. He looked wrecked saying it, and I hated that part of me wanted to cross the kitchen and hold him. Evan, I never wanted you here because I couldn't manage without you. I wanted you here because when you left, the house felt wrong. That was almost enough to undo me. Almost. But understanding the past didn't tell me what came next. I picked up my jacket. Caleb's face changed. You're leaving. Tonight, yes. And after tonight? I forced myself to meet his eyes. I don't know. He nodded once, like the answer hurt too much to risk speaking. I walked to the door with the spare key heavy in my pocket. Caleb didn't ask for it back. I didn't offer it. Outside, I finally understood that I had never accidentally become part of Caleb's life. He had been making room for me all along. What I still didn't know was whether either of us was brave enough to admit what that room was supposed to become. The next evening, I went back to Caleb's house because I had promised earlier in the week to return a folder Owen needed for school. I could have left it at the door. Instead, I used the spare key. Caleb was in the kitchen. He looked up when I entered, and his eyes dropped briefly to the key in my hand. "Owen's upstairs," he said. "I brought his folder." I placed it on the counter. The replacement charger was still there too, exactly where I had left it. "Okay." Caleb's voice was careful. "Thanks. I should have walked out. That had been the plan. Finish the commitment, create distance. Give both of us enough time to decide whether preserving 11 years of friendship mattered more than whatever had begun happening between us. I reached the doorway before Caleb said, "Don't." I stopped. "Don't what?" "Don't leave again while I pretend that's the responsible thing to let you do." I turned around. Caleb's hands were gripping the edge of the counter. "I spent all day telling myself you were right," he said. "Owen matters. Stability matters. You matter enough that I should protect what we already have instead of risking it." "That sounds reasonable." "It's also a lie." I said nothing. Caleb crossed the kitchen until only a few feet separated us. "I'm scared that if we try this and it goes badly, I lose my best friend. I'm scared Owen loses someone he trusts. I'm scared I've built you into our lives so completely that I don't know how to undo it." His voice tightened. "But I'm more scared that I'm going to keep calling you my friend because it's safe until you finally believe that's all I want." My heartbeat was loud enough that I was sure he could hear it. "What do you want?" I asked. Caleb held my gaze. "You." One word with nowhere to hide. "Not because Owen needs you. He has me and I'm his brother. Taking care of him is my responsibility." Caleb stepped closer. "Not because I need someone to cook dinner or drive him somewhere or fix things when work gets ugly. I can manage those things." Another step. "I want you here when there's nothing to fix." I swallowed. "Caleb, I want Sunday dinners when nobody needs anything. I want your coffee in my cabinet because you're going to drink it. I want to buy you another stupid charger when that one breaks. And I want to stop pretending every reason I ask you to stay is about somebody else." His eyes were bright now, but he didn't look away. "If saying that ruins what we had, then at least I ruined it telling you the truth." There it was, the risk I had been demanding without realizing it. He wasn't asking me to rescue his household. He was risking the safest relationship in his life to ask for me. "You don't get to make this choice alone," I said. Caleb's face tightened. "I know." "Good. Because I'm scared too." I moved closer, until there was almost no space between us. "I've spent weeks trying to decide whether wanting you would make everything more complicated." "It will." I laughed softly. Terrible sales pitch. "I'm trying honesty." "Then here's mine. I don't want to go back to being the guy who helps and leaves." Caleb went completely still. "What do you want?" he asked. I reached for his hand. "I want to stay because I choose you too." His fingers closed around mine. "As what? You really need everything spelled out? Right now?" "Yes." I smiled despite the fear still twisting through me. "As your boyfriend, if you can survive saying the word." Caleb let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "My boyfriend." Then he touched my face exactly as he had that night in the kitchen. Except this time neither of us stepped back. I kissed him. It was careful for perhaps half a second before 11 years of knowing each other collided with weeks of wanting something neither of us had known how to name. When we finally separated, his forehead rested against mine. Nothing about Owen, work, or the risks ahead had magically become simpler. But Caleb was still holding my hand. "Stay?" he asked. This time there was no hidden reason inside the question. "Yeah," I said. "I'm staying." 3 weeks later, I was standing at Caleb's stove making dinner while Owen complained from the table, that apparently being 16 meant everyone expected him to know what he wanted to do with the rest of his life. You could start by knowing what you want to do with your history homework, Caleb said. That's completely different. Obviously, I smiled into the pan. Owen had been different since the school event. Not dramatically, just less guarded about the shape of his family. He no longer seemed to brace himself every time someone asked who was coming with him somewhere. Caleb was still his brother and guardian. I was still Evan. Nothing needed a cleaner label than that. My relationship with Caleb, however, had acquired one. Boyfriend still sounded strange sometimes, mostly because it made something new out of a person I had known for 11 years. My coffee now occupied permanent cabinet space. The replacement charger was beside the couch again. There were clothes of mine upstairs, although Caleb claimed the drawer he had cleared for me was merely efficient storage. I had informed him that secretly preparing household space for me was exactly how this whole problem started. He had kissed me instead of defending himself. That evening, I finished dinner and started clearing the counter before Caleb could. He came up beside me, watching as I loaded the dishwasher. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know. I can handle it." I looked at him. "I know that too." He smiled, understanding the callback before I said anything else. "Thank you for helping." Then he stopped. Owen glanced up from his homework. "What?" Caleb shook his head. "Nothing." I leaned against the counter. "No, finish the sentence. I'd love to hear this." Caleb rolled his eyes, but his expression softened. "I was going to thank you for helping me. And I realized that's not really what this is anymore." Owen made an exaggerated sound of disgust. "If you two are about to have a moment, I'm leaving." He gathered his books and headed upstairs. "History," Caleb called after him. "I know." When his door closed, I looked back at Caleb. "So you don't need my help?" "I never said that." "Careful." He stepped closer and rested a hand at my waist. "I need help sometimes. So do you." "That isn't why I want you here." The words no longer frightened me. I glanced around the kitchen that had once felt like Caleb's house, then like a place I might have occupied too completely. Now my key was in my pocket because I belonged here by choice. "Then why am I here?" I asked just to make him say it. Caleb smiled. "Because we're building something together." I kissed him once, quick and easy, then turned back toward the dishes. "Good answer." He stayed beside me, drying what I washed even though neither of us needed the assistance. Months earlier, I had thought helping my best friend raise his brother had made me see Caleb completely differently. I had been wrong about one thing. Caleb had not become someone different. I had simply stopped looking at him as only my best friend, and finally saw the man who had been making room for me all along.